Welcome to this Bible study series entitled God's Journey of Redeeming Humanity. The Bible begins the story of humanity in a garden. If you look at Genesis chapters 1 and 2, that's what you see. God creates the world and he places humanity, the first humans, Adam and Eve, in a garden. Did you know that the story of the Bible ends with a city that bears the same characteristics as the Garden of Eden? That's what you find in Revelation chapters 21 and 22, the last two chapters of the Bible. And in fact, the entire story of the Bible between those two bookends describes God's journey to redeem humanity, to bring humanity back into the Garden of Eden where they can enjoy a perfect relationship with Him and with one another. So today we are starting our Bible study series with a topic entitled The Potential. So when you look at the world and you see what the earth can produce when a single seed is swallowed, all you have to do is plant a seed, the right conditions, and after a time it becomes a tree. It could be a fruit-bearing tree from a single seed. When you look at a small child, vulnerable, fragile, and when you think that a child like that can become an Einstein or a Mozart, when you look at a country like Singapore, did you know that Singapore, some 25, 30 years ago, was a third world country, and that in one single generation, it developed to become one of the strongest economies of the world? What do these three examples have in common? Well, that's where our theme potential comes in. God created the world and humanity with an incredible potential. And in Genesis chapter 1 and verses 27 and 28, we get the answer to the question, where does that potential come from? It says, so God created mankind in his own image. And the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And so we read this in the first chapter of the Bible, after God created the world and God set our first parents, Adam and Eve, in the garden. And God gave them this commission. So I'd like to ask you a few questions to reflect on the passage we just read and this theme of potential. So what does it mean that God created mankind in his own image? So take a few minutes and think about that. What are the implications? That we as a human race have been created in the image of God the Creator. Also think about the next question. What does it mean that God commended the first humans to rule over the earth? In fact, the Hebrew word translates the idea, conveys the idea of dominion, that God made the first humans as king and queen of the earth, to rule and to dominate over the earth. What do you think that means? That God made them, commissioned them to be rulers of the earth. And the last question I'd like to ask you to reflect on in connection to this passage is, in this portrait of humanity's first chapter, what did humanity lack? What did mankind lack? So God set them in the garden. God created them in his own image. God gave them dominion over all things. They had a perfect relationship with God and with each other. Are they lacking anything? What are they lacking at this particular moment? So as we continue with our reflection, I'd like to say that we all realize that the potential is huge. Potential for human society, potential for the world, potential for the planet. Those are huge potentials. However, if we're honest, we will admit that this potential is often unmet. So deep down, we know we can accomplish more at a personal level. We know that our societies can do a better job. We know that the world can be a better place, not just for us, but for all people. We know that the earth can be more. And his book, The Sinking Ark, the author Norman Myers suggests that human activities are causing about 2 extinctions a week on the planet. You don't have to be a nature lover to know that this is not good news. We live in a world that is very diverse. There is great biodiversity. There are thousands and thousands of different types of species and all the stratas of the animal kingdom. And yet, we as a race are destroying 2 species on average a week. Another author puts it this way. Bill Bryson, and his book, A Short History of Nearly Everything, says that we humans may be the universe's supreme achievement and its worst nightmare simultaneously. We are the climax of creation, and yet at the same time, we are the universe's worst nightmare. So, why is there a gap? Why is there a gap between what we know can be and what actually is? Why is there a gap between the potential that we know can be achieved and the reality that we face daily in our personal lives, at the family level, at the societal level, and at the global level? Why is there such a gap? So let's read another passage in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis, this time Genesis chapter 3, verses 2 to 5. The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman. "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And this is taken from the 3rd chapter of Genesis, verses 2 to 5. So, as we did before, I want you to reflect on this text. And maybe this is the first time you're hearing this text, but I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Adam and Eve and the garden and taking the forbidden fruit. And this story has been told 1,000 times. It's been interpreted multiple times in different ways. And it's so easy to miss the essence of this story. Whether you have a literal talking snake and a literal fruit, which wasn't an apple, by the way, is not the main core characteristics of this narrative. That's not the main point. The main point is that God created humanity in his image, and God created them as free moral agents. They are not robots. They are given a choice. And the choice before them is symbolically illustrated by this tree. The choice before them is to play by God's rules, to be dependent on God, to maintain this relationship of father-children with God, or to become autonomous and play by their own rules and live life their own way. And this is the same dilemma that every human being is confronted with on a daily basis, regardless of your cultural background, regardless of your geography, regardless of your ancestry. Every human being has to make a choice today. Am I going to be autonomous and live life according to my own rules, independent of God, or am I going to follow God's way? And so our first humans, our first parents, had that choice. So the question I want you to ask is, God's original intent for mankind was for them to rule the world according to his ways. So what choice did Satan, the adversary, put before Adam and Eve? What is the choice that the devil put before Adam and Eve? The second question is, in choosing to become gods, quote unquote, meaning their own rulers and independent of the Creator, in choosing to become gods, what did humanity gain and what did they lose? Obviously, they gained something, and that was the lure, that was the temptation of the enemy, of Satan. If you Disobey God, your eyes will be opened. You will be like God. You will be gods. You will gain something. So let's define that. I want you to take a few minutes and think about that. What is it that they gained? And as you know by the story, they lost something too. What is it that they lost? And the subsequent question, which follows the logical sequence, is was it worth it? What they gained, was it worth what they lost? So the entire story of the books of the Bible following this incident is telling the story of God redeeming humanity. And God's goal, God's plan is to redeem humanity, to get humanity back on track, back in the garden, and to get humanity to make the right choice. So Adam chose to follow his own way. The Bible has this concept of type and antitype. And it's a theological tool that the authors of the Bible have used both in the Old Covenant and in the New Covenant to convey God's truth. And so Adam is the first human. And Jesus, the Son of God, is portrayed as the second Adam. And what this communicates is that there are two types of humanities. There is the humanity of Adam that is rebellious at its core, that wants to do what it wants to do. And then there's the humanity of Jesus that shows restraint, that shows self-control, that shows a willingness to submit to God's way. And so, in choosing to follow their own way, Adam and Eve build a human society that culminated in chaos. And that's what we see in the story of Genesis. We see that society evolved to become very chaotic, very oppressive, very destructive, very violent, where the weak are exploited and oppressed, where children and women, who are often the most vulnerable in our societies, are at the bottom rung of society and are abused and oppressed. And Genesis chapter 6, God makes the decision to wipe the earth clean. Again, you could get into a debate. Was it a partial flood? Was it a global flood? I personally lean more towards the understanding that it was a partial flood, but that's not the most important thing in this topic. The important thing is that God sees that humanity over, we don't know what length of time, maybe thousands of years, has evolved to become so self-destructive that it's a project that has failed, and God decided to start over again with Noah. So we have the flood. Later on, in Genesis chapter 12, we see that God starts again with one man named Abraham, and he starts with the family of Abraham to create a people, a nation that would ultimately be a blessing to the whole world. Okay, and so look at it as God working in concentric circles, starting with Abraham and his family and forming the nation of the Jews that would become a blessing to all nations. So Genesis chapter 12, we read about God's call to Abraham. Ultimately, the family of Abraham and their descendants, who become the nation of the Jews, the nation of Israel, we see that just like the first humans, they fail. In fact, a succession of kings, except for a few of them, choose to disobey God and follow their own way, which eventually leads in the deportation of God's people into Babylon, into Assyria first, and then later on into Babylon, and they become slaves. And again, it's a failed project. You can read about that if you are interested in 2 Kings chapter 17. In fact, the whole chapter is about that. However, in spite of these attempts that have failed, God does not give up on the human race. God still tries epoch after epoch to bring back humanity to the Garden of Eden. And there's this great message of hope that you read about in Isaiah 35. And so we'll stop right here at this point. I hope this was inspiring. I hope this was an eye-opener for you. And we'll see you next time.